'89. Len Jeffries, Dr. Jeffries, was not involved in the curriculum process since March '89.
Why is
But
that?
for the last 2 years, they have used the strategy of scapegoating and have raised me up every time the issue of curricular change and doing the right thing and getting at the truth of the curriculum. I have not been involved since March '89, but every time they get a chance to talk about the curriculum, they raise Len Jeffries up. It was a red herring then when they started to raise it with Diane Ravitch taking the lead, and it's a red herring now.
Diane Ravitch is adjunct professor at Columbia University, and you make the point that it used to be that the textbooks were controlled by people in Texas. You remember that. They decided evolution and all this. Now, the professor in a speech at Albany makes this point about who's controlling these textbooks now. Here is his reference to Diane Ravitch as a Texas Jew.
In fact, she is the new standard. The old standard was a Bible Belt Texas rural family. That's the standard for the textbooks that went into the schools for generations. Now the new standard is not a Bible Belt Texas family, but a sophisticated Texas Jew, and that standard is not good enough either. Because many people, such as the Ravitches, who happen to be Jewish, have blinded us from the attack coming from the Jewish community. Systematic, unrelenting, and until we can look at it and deal with it, there's no efforts we can make that are going to be successful. Not anti-Semitic to raise the issue, but if you do not deal with it, you're fooling yourself. There's an orchestrated attack by the Schlesingers and the Shankers, working with the white conservatives, with George Wills, the Heritage Foundation. We're pinpointing their relationship. We're putting it to our African computer. The document is being prepared.
We are in New York City with Professor Len Jeffries, and we'll be back in just a moment. The fact that what makes Professor Jeffries an especially important public figure today is the contribution that he was asked to make as a tenured professor in charge of the Black Studies Department at CUNY, about what your children should learn, for example, about the slaves, how the slaves get here, who brought them here. Professor Jeffries is saying, as he did in a speech in Albany, that one of the main hands in the slave trade were wealthy Jews. Here's how he put it.
And here's a picture of the Amsterdam Synagogue, which was the center of slave trading for the Dutch. Amsterdam became the leading port in this period of time for slavery. And it was around the synagogue that the slaving system was established. Now, we're not talking about most Jews. Most Jews were being beat up and down Europe and persecuted for being Jewish. We're talking about rich Jews, and we specifically make that distinction. We're not talking about white folks. In general, when we talk about oppression, we're talking about the wealthy white folks, the powerful white folks that make the decision. So let's make some decisions, some clarity when we're talking about these things. But the documentation is there. And let's get some clarity. We've had a clip with Diane Ravitch and the statement of the book. And before we even get to a discussion of that, another clip goes out. Okay? We're not going to allow this to happen. There's going to be clarity. The question of Diane Ravitch was raised because she has self-appointed herself to be the arbiter of what should be taught in the curriculum around the United States. What we are saying is that for generations, my generations and others went to a school where the major textbook was David Seville Muthi, a professor at Columbia University, and that textbook was such that it was geared to meeting what would be accepted by Bible Belt Christians in Texas, which meant that Bible Belt Christians in rural Texas would not accept anything positive about black folks. So in those textbooks, for generations, there was nothing positive about black folks. What we are saying very clearly, that even though a more sophisticated person has come in from Texas, and she is not a Bible Belt Christian, and she happens to be a Jew, Her lack of understanding of the experience of Africans, Asians, and Latinos is such that neither is her standard good enough. And we say that clearly. It is not a reference to someone being Jewish. Now, the question that has just been raised here was the question of, what do we say about enslavement? And we've been saying this for many years. I first went to Africa in 1961. And every time we go to Ghana, where along the west coast of Africa there is, in a 200-mile stretch, 40 slave forts and dungeons put in place by the Europeans. For hundreds of years, this is where the degradation of African peoples took place. Some of those dungeons hold thousands. I was in Cape Coast Dungeon and Elmina Dungeon when this controversy broke, communing with our ancestors, the tens of millions pulled out of Africa by all sorts of Europeans. And we do not single out one group. We never have. And we will not let it happen today. Let's get clarity on this matter. It was the New York Times that first raised this issue in April the 20th, 1990, after a Mr. Berger came into my classroom. We have the tape of Mr. Berger coming in the classroom. We know what we said, and we did not single out the rich Jewish population. We talked about everybody being involved in enslavement. He specifically had an agenda, and we're going to show the world that tape when we get a chance. So he specifically had an agenda which was to stamp me as anti-white, anti-Semitic, and a person with crazy ideas. That went into the New York Times, April the 20th, 1990, to impact on the vote of the Board of Regents, which was to take place the following week. It did not work. The red herring of anti-Semitism, anti-white did not work. The Board of Regents voted April the 27th to start making curricular change, 17-0. Over the next year, they put in place a committee to do that. And that committee came up with a document called We Are One People, Culturally Interdependent. It was produced in June, 91. Because of the battle raised against us by the Ravagers and others, they had lost battle after battle. Now the question of the war was being